Catherine Sterling, Duchess of Ashbourne, stood at the head of her own dining table on an October evening and watched her husband's face turn to stone. 8 county families sat between them, candles gleaming on silver, when a footman placed a third setting where no plate had ever been. Edmund's hand froze halfway to his wine glass. Catherine smiled, the composed, terrible smile of a woman who had spent 6 months tracing household accounts, riding alone to a cottage in Thornbury, and asking a stranger a single question: is he kind? The answer had been yes. The kindest man Anna Birch had ever known. Also the saddest, because he came to her kitchen to be happy and could not take it home with him. Now the door opened, and Anna entered with her 3-year-old son, and Catherine was about to show her husband what happened when a woman who had managed 112 dinners in perfect silence finally decided to speak. The footman placed the third setting with care, as though the porcelain itself might detonate. Edmund Sterling, Duke of Ashbourne, entered the dining room at precisely 7 o'clock. His habit, his reliability, the clockwork that had governed their marriage for 5 years. He saw the plate. His body went rigid. Not the stiffness of formal posture, but the paralysis of a man who had just seen his architecture collapse. Catherine stood at the head of the table, her hands resting lightly on the back of her chair. She wore the emerald silk he had complimented once, 3 years ago, the last time he had noticed what she wore. Her hair was arranged in the style his mother had favored. She had found the reference in an old portrait and brought it to her maid that morning. Every detail of this evening had been designed, every word rehearsed. 6 months of preparation distilled into a single dinner that would end the marriage they had been performing and begin the reckoning they had been avoiding. Catherine spoke warmly. "Good evening, Edmund. I hope you had a pleasant ride." He did not answer. His eyes moved from the third plate to her face, searching for an explanation that would not destroy him. She offered none. The guests were already seated. Lord and Lady Pemberton, who had attended their wedding, the Ashtons, whose estate bordered Ashbourne to the east, the vicar and his wife, the magistrate, the Dowager Duchess Marguerite, Edmund's mother, who sat to Catherine's right and whose expression had already sharpened into suspicion. 8 people who represented the county's opinion, its memory, its capacity for judgment. Catherine had chosen them carefully. Edmund took his seat. His hands rested on the table, fingers spread as though bracing against a fall. Catherine signaled the footman, who disappeared into the corridor. The room held its breath. Conversation faltered. Lady Pemberton glanced at the third setting and then at Catherine, her smile uncertain. The door opened. Anna Birch entered first, her hand clasped around the wrist of a small boy. She wore her best dress, a pale blue muslin that was clean, well-mended, and utterly wrong for the room. The guests' eyes moved over her with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to placing strangers within a social order. Tenant farmer's daughter, perhaps. A village school teacher, certainly not someone who belonged to the Duke of Ashbourne's table. The boy, 3 years old, dark-haired, bright-eyed, did not understand the silence. He looked around the room with open curiosity, taking in the candles, the silver, the faces watching him. Then his gaze found Edmund, and his face split into a grin. He called out excitedly, "Eddie!" He tugged free of his mother's hand and ran to Edmund's chair, grabbing his sleeve with both hands. "Eddie, why is the lady from the big house angry?" The room stopped. Not the polite stillness of a dinner party observing etiquette, but the airless silence of 8 people realizing they were witnessing something they should not be witnessing. Edmund's face drained of color. Anna's hand flew to her mouth. The Dowager Duchess rose halfway from her chair, then sank back down, her mouth a thin line. Catherine lifted her wineglass. The crystal caught the candlelight, scattering it across the white tablecloth like broken stars. She spoke clearly. "Miss Birch, welcome to Ashbourne Park. Please sit." She gestured to the third plate. Anna did not move. Her eyes were fixed on Edmund, whose gaze remained locked on the boy's face. Will, that was the boy's name, Catherine knew, because she had traced the baptismal record, the midwife's bill, the weekly hamper's charge to the estate's household account under the innocuous label provisions. Catherine continued. "Miss Birch has been a friend to my husband for some time. She saved his life on the Thornbury Road, or so I'm told. A fall from his horse, a twisted ankle. She provided shelter and care. Is that correct, Edmund?" Edmund's jaw tightened. He did not speak. Will, oblivious, climbed onto Edmund's lap and began examining the buttons on his waistcoat with intense concentration. Catherine went on. "I thought it only proper to invite Miss Birch to join us this evening, to thank her for her kindness, and to ask her about the history of her family's connection to this estate." Anna's face went pale. She took a step backward, but the footman had already closed the door behind her. Catherine gestured again to the empty chair. This time, Anna moved. She crossed the room slowly, her son still perched on the Duke's lap, and sat in the chair that had been prepared for her. Her hands trembled as she reached for her napkin. Catherine addressed the table. Miss Birch's father was Samuel Birch. He was a tenant on this estate 23 years ago. A good man, by all accounts. Hardworking, honest. He served 2 years in prison for poaching on Ashbourne land. Charges brought by the 7th Duke, Edmund's father. Samuel Birch died 3 months after his release. His wife followed a year later. Their daughter Anna was 4 years old. The magistrate shifted in his seat. Lady Ashton's fork clattered against her plate. The vicar's wife leaned forward, her expression caught between fascination and horror. Catherine let the silence stretch, counting the seconds, watching the realization spread across their faces. She pressed on. What the parish does not know is that the charges were fabricated. Samuel Birch never poached. The 7th Duke wanted to expand the hunting grounds. They needed the Birch family's cottage removed. When Samuel refused to leave, charges were invented. Evidence was planted. A man was destroyed to clear land for pheasants. Edmund's hands, resting on the table on either side of Will, had curled into fists. Up the Dowager Duchess rose to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. Her voice was sharp. Catherine, this is neither the time nor the place. Catherine cut her off. Sit down, Marguerite. The fish course has not been served. The Dowager remained standing. Catherine turned to face her, and the expression on her face, composed, immovable, designed to be witnessed, made the older woman sink slowly back into her chair. Catherine's voice remained level. My husband learned of this crime 3 years ago. He received a deathbed confession from Greaves, his father's former steward. The letter detailed the entire affair, the fabricated evidence, the bribe to the magistrate, the deliberate destruction of an innocent family. Edmund rode to Thornbury the day he received the letter. He found Anna Birch living in a cottage with a leaking roof, a widow with an infant son, surviving on what little her late husband's family would spare. He paid for repairs. He provided a bank draft. He arranged for regular provisions to be delivered. She paused, lifting her glass again. The wine inside was untouched. She continued. He has continued those visits every Thursday for 3 years. Every Thursday, without fail, my husband rides to Thornbury. He sits in Miss Birch's kitchen. He plays with her son. He repairs shelves and mends fences and brings cheese and bread and milk. He has been, I am told, unfailingly kind. He has also been unfailingly silent about the reason for his visits, both to Miss Birch and to this household. Restitution, he calls it, duty, not the correction of his father's sin. She set the glass down and looked directly at her husband. Edmund's face was a mask, every line of it carved from stone. Will had stopped playing with the buttons and was looking up at him, confused by the tension in the room. Catherine raised her glass one final time. To the Birch family, may they finally receive the justice they were denied. No one moved. No one raised a glass. The Dowager stood again, this time with enough force to knock her chair backward. She did not speak. She turned and walked from the room, her skirts snapping behind her like a whip. The door slammed. Will flinched. Edmund's arms came around him instinctively, steadying him. The boy looked up at his mother, his lower lip trembling. Anna spoke softly. It's all right, Will. Come here. But Will did not move. He stayed where he was, tucked against Edmund's chest, and asked in a small, bewildered voice, Eddie, why is everyone so quiet? Catherine set down her glass. The sound of crystal meeting wood was the only sound in the room. She looked at her husband, at the woman sitting in the third chair, at the boy who had just called the Duke of Ashbourne by a name no one in this house had ever heard. She announced calmly, Dinner is concluded. Thank you all for coming. 5 years earlier, Catherine Langley had stood in the chapel at Ashbourne Park and married a man she had met 4 times. The marriage had been arranged by her father and the 7th Duke, a political alliance that secured the Langley family's influence in the county and provided the Sterlings with the financial stability they needed after 2 failed harvests. And Edmund had been 29, newly inheriting the title after his father's sudden death. Catherine had been 25, the eldest daughter of a family whose wealth came from shipping and whose social position required the legitimacy of aristocratic connection. The wedding had been efficient. The vows had been spoken clearly. The guests had applauded. Catherine had worn white silk and carried roses from the Ashbourne gardens. Edmund had stood beside her with perfect posture and a face that revealed nothing. They had danced once at the reception. He had complimented her dress. She had thanked him. They had not touched again until the carriage ride back to Ashbourne, when his hand had briefly steadied her elbow as she stepped down onto the gravel drive. Their wedding night had been polite, brief. He had asked if she was comfortable. She had said yes. He had blown out the candle and left before dawn. She had lain awake in the dark, listening to the sound of his boots retreating down the corridor, and wondered if this was what marriage was supposed to feel like, a transaction completed, a contract signed, two people occupying the same house and calling it a union. The days that followed had established a pattern that would govern the next 5 years. Edmund managed the estate's agricultural concerns and the tenants. Catherine managed the household, staff, accounts, social calendar, correspondence. They took breakfast together in silence. They dressed for dinner and sat at opposite ends of a table long enough to seat 20. They attended church on Sundays, standing side by side in the family pew, and returned home to separate studies where they worked until the lamps burned low. Catherine learned the rhythms of Ashbourne Park with the precision she had once applied to her father's shipping ledgers. She knew which tenants paid rent on time and which required reminders. She knew the cook's preferences, the housekeeper's grudges, the footman's habit of polishing silver too vigorously and leaving scratches. She knew the exact cost of candles, coal, soap, and wine. She knew how many guests could be accommodated comfortably and how many would require the opening of the east wing. She knew everything except the man she had married. Edmund was correct in all things. He never raised his voice. He never forgot an anniversary. He never failed to compliment her management of the household or her handling of a difficult guest. He signed the documents she placed before him, approved the menus she suggested, and attended every dinner she arranged. He was unfailingly polite, unfailingly reliable, and utterly absent. She told herself this was normal. Marriage among their class was not built on affection. It was built on duty, stability, and the efficient management of shared resources. She had not expected love. She had not even expected friendship. What she had expected, what she had been promised by her mother, by her aunts, by every woman who had prepared her for this role, was partnership, a shared purpose, the quiet satisfaction of building something together. Instead, she had built everything alone. 112 dinners in 5 years. She had counted them once, during a sleepless night when the silence in the house felt heavier than stone. And 112 evenings of candlelight and conversation, of managing seating arrangements and dietary restrictions and the delicate social ballet of county politics. Edmund had attended everyone. He had sat at the head of the table, contributed to conversations when necessary, and thanked her afterward with the same courteous efficiency he used to thank the cook for a well-prepared meal. Not once had he asked what she wanted. Not once had he asked if she was tired, if she was lonely, if the endless performance of Duchess was hollowing her out from the inside. She had stopped expecting him to ask. She had stopped expecting anything except the machinery of their shared life to continue functioning with the same flawless precision it always had. And then, 20 months ago, during the quarterly reconciliation of household accounts, she had found the discrepancy. The ledger entry was small, unremarkable. A recurring charge listed as estate provisions, logged every Thursday for the past 16 months with no corresponding delivery record and no tenant name attached. Catherine had stared at the entry for a long time, her pen hovering over the page. Provisions implied food, cheese, bread, milk, preserves. The quantity suggested a small household. The frequency suggested regularity. The lack of a tenant name suggested concealment. She had traced the supplier first, a grocer in Thornbury, a village 6 miles south of Ashbourne. She had written to him under the pretense of verifying an account error, requesting details of the delivery address. He had replied promptly, not providing not an address but a description. The Birch Cottage, east end of the village, past the mill. Catherine had ridden to Thornbury on a cold morning in March, wearing a gray coat and no jewelry, her hair pinned simply beneath a plain bonnet. She had told no one where she was going. She had left before dawn and taken the quietest route, avoiding the main road where she might be recognized. The Birch Cottage was small, set back from the lane behind a low stone wall. Smoke rose from the chimney. A child's wooden horse lay abandoned in the garden. She had knocked. The door had opened. The woman who answered was young, 22, perhaps 23, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, and a baby on her hip. She had looked at Catherine with polite confusion, clearly uncertain why a stranger in a fine gray coat was standing on her doorstep. Catherine spoke carefully. "I am sorry to disturb you. I am looking for Miss Anna Birch." The woman replied softly, "I am Anna Birch. May I help you?" Catherine had hesitated. She had planned this conversation carefully, rehearsing questions and responses during the long ride from Ashbourne. But standing on the threshold of this small cottage, looking at this young woman who did not know her and had no reason to trust her, all her careful planning had dissolved. She asked quietly, "May I come in?" Anna had stepped aside. The cottage interior was simple: 2 rooms, a hearth, a table with mismatched chairs. The baby on Anna's hip was perhaps a year old, round-faced and solemn. The shelf above the hearth sagged at one end. It repaired with nails that had been driven at awkward angles by someone who did not know how to use a hammer. On the windowsill, a pressed wildflower rested in a small frame. Anna had offered tea. Catherine had accepted. They had sat at the table, and for several minutes neither had spoken. The baby, Will, Anna called him, had reached for Catherine's sleeve, and she had let him grasp it, feeling the small strength of his fingers. Anna spoke at last. "You are from Ashbourne?" It was not a question. Catherine nodded. "Yes." Anna's voice was quiet. "He did not send you?" She shook her head. "No." Anna had looked down at her hands, wrapped around her teacup. Her fingers were work-roughened, the nails short and uneven. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. She asked directly, "Is he kind to you?" Catherine had not expected the question. It had landed with the force of something she had been avoiding for 5 years, something she had buried beneath account ledgers and dinner schedules and the relentless machinery of a role she performed so well that no one, including herself, had thought to ask if it was enough. Catherine answered slowly, "He is correct. He is reliable. He is never unkind." Anna pressed gently. "That is not what I asked." Catherine set down her teacup. Her hands were trembling, and she had pressed them flat against the table to still them. She admitted quietly, "No, he's not kind to me. He's nothing to me. We share a house and a name, and 112 dinners, and I could not tell you what he thinks about when he is alone, or what he dreams about, or whether he has ever been happy in his life." Anna had looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in her expression had shifted. She said softly, "He talks about you." Catherine leaned forward. "What does he say?" Anna replied carefully. "That you are the most capable woman he has ever known, that the estate runs perfectly because of you, that you never need anything from him." Catherine felt the words cut deep. "And you hear that as a compliment?" Anna's voice was gentle. "I hear it as a man describing a door he decided not to open." They had sat in silence after that. Will had dozed off against his mother's shoulder. The fire in the hearth had burned low. Catherine had risen to leave, pulling on her gloves, fastening her coat. At the door, she had turned back. She asked the question again. "Is he kind?" Anna's eyes had filled. She answered honestly, "He is the kindest man I have ever known. He's also the saddest, because he comes here to be happy, and he cannot take it home with him." Catherine had ridden back to Ashbourne in silence. She had returned the horse to the stable herself, climbed the stairs to her room, and locked the door. She had stood at the window, looking out over the gardens her husband's mother had planted, and made a decision. She would not confront him. She would not demand explanations or issue ultimatums. She would do what she did best, what she had been doing for 5 years. She would manage the situation with precision, with care, and with the kind of architectural planning that left nothing to chance. She would set a third plate at the table and invite the woman her husband visited every Thursday to sit in the chair that had always been empty. She would do it in front of witnesses who mattered, people whose opinions shaped the county's memory, whose silence could not be purchased, whose presence would ensure that the revelation could not be quietly buried. She would orchestrate the exposure of a secret her husband had maintained for 3 years, and she would do it with such meticulous control that no one, not even Edmund, would realize she had been planning it for 6 months. The dinner was scheduled for October. She had 6 months to prepare. The guests departed in silence. No one offered congratulations for the meal. No one lingered in the drawing room for coffee. They filed out one by one, their faces carefully blank, as their farewells clipped and formal. Catherine stood in the entrance hall and accepted their thanks with the same composed grace she had maintained throughout the dinner. Edmund had disappeared the moment the table was cleared, retreating to his study and locking the door behind him. The dowager had not returned. Anna remained in the guest room where a maid had taken her after the dinner concluded. Will was asleep on the bed, curled on his side with one hand tucked beneath his cheek. Anna sat in the chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. Catherine found her there an hour later. She knocked once, then entered without waiting for an invitation. Anna did not turn. Anna's voice was flat. He never told me. He never told me who he was. I knew he was from Ashbourne. He said as much the first time he came. But I thought he was a steward, someone managing the estate. I did not know he was the Duke. Catherine spoke quietly. I know. Anna's voice broke. And his father. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. His father destroyed mine, and he never told me. Catherine crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite Anna. She did not reach for her hand. She did not offer comfort. She simply sat and waited until the shaking subsided and Anna's breathing steadied. Catherine asked gently, Did you love him? Anna looked at her eyes red and swollen. She answered truthfully, I loved the man who sat on my kitchen stool and played with my son and told me stories about his mother's roses. I do not know if that man lives in this house. Catherine's voice was firm. He does not, because he chose not to bring him home. Anna wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She repeated her earlier words. He talks about you. He says you are the most capable woman he has ever known, that you never need anything from him. Catherine's tone was weary. I heard you the first time. Anna pressed on. Then you know what it means. Catherine acknowledged it. I know what it means. It means he chose your kitchen over my dining room every Thursday for 3 years. He chose comfort over courage. And I... She stopped, her voice catching. I chose management over myself. I built a system so efficient, so flawless, that no one, including me, thought to ask if there was a person underneath it. We are both cowards. His cowardice had a cottage. Mine had a quarterly report. Anna was quiet for a long time. Will shifted in his sleep, and murmuring something inaudible. Finally, Anna spoke. She asked simply, What happens now? Catherine answered steadily. Now we discover what remains when the machinery stops. 3 days after the dinner, a letter arrived from Thornbury. It was brief, written in a shaking hand by Anna's late husband's sister. The cottage was no longer available. The family wanted Anna gone. The dinner at Ashbourne Park had made her visible in a way that was no longer tolerable. She had 1 week to remove herself and her son. Catherine read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and went to find her husband. Edmund had not left his study since the dinner. Meals were brought to him on trays and returned untouched. The dowager had attempted to speak with him once and been turned away. Catherine had not tried. She had been waiting for the crisis to escalate beyond what either of them could ignore alone. She knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for permission. Edmund was sitting at his desk, his head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, his face haggard, his eyes hollow. Catherine spoke directly. Your Miss Birch has been displaced. The cottage in Thornbury is no longer available to her. The family wants her gone. She has a 3-year-old child and nowhere to sleep. My dinner revelation made her visible to a village that preferred her invisible. Edmund stared at the letter. His hands, resting on the desk, were trembling. He began uncertainly. I will ride. Catherine cut him off. You will not ride to Thornbury to rescue her alone in the dark like a man in a novel. You and I will solve this together. Because I created this crisis, and you created the conditions for it. And if we cannot manage a shared problem without retreating to our separate performances, then this marriage is not hollow. It is dead. Edmund looked at her. For the first time in 5 years, she saw something in his face that was not correctness or politeness or dutiful efficiency. She saw fear. He admitted quietly, I do not know how. Catherine's voice was steady. Neither do I. But we will learn. Tonight. Now. Together. They worked through the night. Catherine spread maps and ledgers across the desk, identifying properties on the estate that could serve as a permanent residence. The South Cottage, small, well-maintained, vacant since the previous tenant's death 2 years ago, was the best option. Edmund drafted the deed transfer. His handwriting unsteady but legible. Catherine composed a letter to the estate solicitor, instructing him to formalize a trust that would provide Anna with an independent income, separate from any personal connection to Edmund. At dawn, they rode to Thornbury together in a carriage, sitting side by side for the first time with a shared purpose. Edmund stared out the window, his jaw tight. Catherine watched him, seeing for the first time the man beneath the performance, terrified, exhausted, and utterly lost. She observed quietly, "You are afraid." He did not deny it. He confessed softly, "I have been afraid for 3 years. The cottage was where I went to stop being afraid. Now there is nowhere left." Catherine's voice was gentle. "There is here, this carriage, this morning, this problem we made together." He turned to look at her, and then something in his expression shifted. Not relief, not gratitude, something smaller and more fragile, recognition. When they arrived at the Thornbury cottage, Anna was already packing. Will sat on the floor, playing with the wooden horse, oblivious to the tension in the room. Anna looked up when the door opened, her face pale and drawn. Edmund stepped forward. He began carefully. "Miss Birch?" Anna held up a hand, stopping him. Her voice was quiet but forceful. Do not apologize. Do not explain. Just tell me the truth. All of it. Now." Edmund's hands clenched at his sides. He took a breath, then another, and began to speak. He stated plainly, "Your father was Samuel Birch. He was a tenant on the Ashbourne estate. My father, the 7th Duke, wanted to expand the hunting grounds. Your father's cottage was in the way. When your father refused to leave, my father had him arrested on false charges. Poaching. Evidence was planted. A magistrate was bribed. Your father served 2 years. He died 3 months after his release." Anna's face went white. She sat down heavily in the nearest chair, her hands gripping the armrests. Edmund continued, his voice level. "I learned this 3 years ago. A letter from Greaves, my father's steward, a deathbed confession. I came to Thornbury to pay a debt. I paid for the roof, the provisions, the midwife when Will was born. Restitution was complete in a month." He paused, his gaze dropping to the floor. His voice grew quieter. "I kept coming back. Because I owed you. Because your kitchen was the only room in my life where I felt honest. Where I could sit on a stool too small for my title and talk about roses and play with your son and be a man I liked. I did not tell you the truth because telling you meant you would look at me the way you are looking at me now." Anna's breathing was ragged. Tears streamed down her face, but she did not wipe them away. Her voice shook. "You sat in my kitchen. You played with my son. You let him call you Eddie? And the whole time, you were the son of the man who destroyed my father." Edmund answered simply, "Yes." Anna whispered harshly, "Get out." Edmund did not move. Anna rose from the chair, her hands clenched into fists. She shouted, "Get out!" This time he obeyed, turning and walking out the door without another word. Catherine, who had been standing in the doorway, did not follow him. She stepped into the cottage and closed the door behind her. Anna collapsed back into the chair, her face in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. Catherine waited until the sobs subsided, then crossed the room and knelt beside her. Catherine spoke quietly. "South Cottage at Ashbourne is yours. The deed is in my name, not his. The trust is formalized under the estate, not under Edmund's personal account. Whatever you decide about him, whether you forgive or never speak to him again, the roof and the income remain. This is not his gilt-paid and cheese and Thursday affection. This is the estate's debt, a deed, an apology, and your father's name restored in the parish register." Anna looked up, her eyes red and swollen. She asked hoarsely, "Why are you doing this?" Catherine answered honestly, "Because I detonated your life at a dinner party, and because I owe you a roof." Catherine claimed the morning room 3 days later. It was a small, south-facing space on the 2nd floor that had been closed for years, the furniture draped in dust covers, the fireplace cold and empty. She had the room cleared, the windows opened, the floor scrubbed. She brought 2 armchairs from storage, a small table, a lamp. She lit the fire herself, kneeling on the hearthstone and coaxing the kindling into flame. When Edmund found her that evening, she was sitting in one of the chairs, a book open in her lap, the firelight casting shadows across the walls. He stood in the doorway, uncertain. He asked hesitantly, "What is this room?" Catherine did not look up. "A room without a schedule?" He hesitated and stepped inside. He asked carefully. "May I sit?" she replied evenly. "If you wish." He sat in the second chair. The fire burned between them. For a long time, neither spoke. Catherine turned a page. Edmund stared at the flames. He spoke finally, his voice low. "I knew. That is the part you need to hear. I knew the marriage was empty. I knew Thursday was the only day I felt alive. I knew you managed everything, and I contributed nothing. And I chose to ride to a cottage instead of sitting in this chair and telling you I was unhappy." Catherine set down her book. She asked directly, "Why?" Edmund answered honestly. "Because the cottage cost nothing. It would have cost everything. Honesty with a woman I married for political convenience and never tried to love. That required courage. The cottage required a saddlebag." The fire crackled. Catherine's hands rested on the arms of her chair, her fingers gripping the wood. She stated plainly, "You gave her your warmth and your humor, the sound of your voice when it is not performing. You gave me your signature on quarterly reports." He acknowledged it. "Yes." Catherine's voice held steel beneath its steadiness. "That is not blindness, Edmund. Blindness would be kinder. You saw the door and chose not to open it." He repeated quietly, "Yes." Catherine leaned forward slightly. "Then you understand that what I need from you is not an apology. An apology is what a man offers when he made a mistake. You made a choice. 3 years of weekly choices. What I need is for you to sit in this chair every evening and choose me. Not because I am easier than the cottage, but because I am harder, and that you are finally willing to do what is hard." Edmund looked at her. The firelight reflected in his eyes, and for the first time since the dinner, she saw something other than fear. She saw determination. He said firmly, "I will sit." She picked up her book. "Good. Now be quiet. I am reading." He stayed for an hour that first evening. The next night he returned. By the end of the week, the fire in the morning room was lit every evening at 7, and both chairs were occupied. The transformation was not sudden. It was slow, painful, and marked by failures as much as progress. Some evenings Edmund came to the morning room and sat in silence, unable to find words. Some evenings he did not come at all, and Catherine read alone, the second chair empty. Some evenings he tried to speak and could not, his voice catching on truths he had buried for so long he no longer knew how to unearth them. But he kept returning. One evening, 3 weeks after the dinner, he told her about his mother. Her name had been Eleanor. She had grown roses along the south wall of the garden, pink ones that bloomed in the morning light. She had died when he was 14, and no one had told him until after the funeral was arranged. He had sat through the service in silence, his father beside him, and had not cried. Catherine said gently, "Tell me about the roses." And he did. Another evening, he told her about Greaves's letter, the way his hands had shaken when he opened it, the way the words had rearranged everything he thought he knew about his father, his family, the legacy he had inherited. He had ridden to Thornbury the next day, carrying a bank draft and a speech he had rehearsed a dozen times. Anna had answered the door with Will on her hip, and all his rehearsed words had dissolved. He admitted quietly, "I thought I could pay the debt and leave. I thought restitution was something you could complete in a month." Catherine observed, "But you stayed." He agreed. "I stayed, because she asked if I wanted tea, and I said yes. And for the first time in my life, I was sitting in a room where no one expected me to be a duke." Catherine did not respond immediately. She stared into the fire, her hands resting in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. She confessed slowly, "I do not know who I am without the accounts, without the management, without the performance. I built the system because I was afraid there was nothing behind it. And now the system is broken, and I have to find out." Edmund turned to look at her. He asked gently, "What have you found?" Catherine answered truthfully, "That I am angry, that I have been angry for 5 years and called it competence, that I want things I have never named, that the woman who engineered a dinner to destroy your secret is more alive than the woman who managed 112 dinners to maintain it." Edmund asked carefully, "Is that frightening?" She admitted, "Terrifying. The anger is mine. The want is mine. Neither belongs to the system." They belong to someone I have not met yet, Edmund said quietly. I would like to meet her. Catherine looked at him. The firelight caught the lines of his face, the exhaustion and determination written there in equal measure. She replied honestly, that she is not ready. He promised. I will wait. Catherine's voice was firm. You will wait in this chair, and you will make tea. Edmund blinked. He said uncertainly, I do not know how to make tea, Catherine instructed. Then you will learn. Go to the kitchen. Ask Mrs. Fenton where the kettle is kept. Boil water, measure leaves. Bring me a cup. Do not return until you have done it yourself. He stood slowly, uncertain, then left the room. Catherine listened to his footsteps retreating down the corridor, then turned back to her book. 20 minutes later, he returned carrying a tray. The teacup rattled against the saucer as he set it down on the table beside her chair. She lifted the cup and sipped. Her face remained impassive. She stated flatly, This is terrible. He acknowledged. I am aware. Catherine took another sip. Miriam, it is also the first cup of tea you have ever made me. Make another one tomorrow. Better. He did. The next evening's tea was slightly less terrible. By February, it was acceptable. By March, she no longer needed to tell him how she took it. Lemon, no sugar, second shelf, left side. Spring arrived slowly, softening the edges of Ashbourne Park. The morning room no longer needed the fire, but they lit it anyway, a ritual that had become as essential as the chairs themselves. Edmund entered one evening in late April, carrying a small bunch of wildflowers. He set them on the table beside Catherine's chair without speaking. She looked up from her book. She asked curiously, What are these? He answered simply, Wildflowers, from the south garden. She replied dryly, I can see that. Why are they here? Edmund explained, Because you have never asked me for flowers, and I thought it was time I gave you something you did not have to ask for. Catherine set down her book and picked up the flowers, turning them slowly in her hands. They were simple, daisies, clover, a few sprigs of lavender, nothing like the elaborate arrangements that appeared in the entrance hall every week, ordered by the housekeeper and charged to the household account. She said softly, Thank you. Edmund sat in his chair. For a long time, they said nothing. The fire crackled. The flowers rested on the table between them, small and imperfect, and entirely theirs. Edmund spoke at last. Anna has agreed to let Will visit on Saturdays, in daylight, with both of us present. Catherine looked at him. She asked carefully. Both of us? Edmund clarified. She was very specific. She said if I wanted to see Will, it would be in the presence of my wife, in a room where there were no secrets. Catherine considered this. She said thoughtfully, That is fair. Edmund admitted. I thought you might object. Catherine asked. Why would I object? You love that child, and he loves you. Denying that would be petty, and I am not interested in being petty. I am interested in building something that does not require concealment to function. Edmund's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. He said quietly, I do not deserve you. Catherine agreed. No, you do not, but you are improving, marginally. She reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. Not gently, the grip of a woman who had spent 6 months dismantling a marriage and 3 months rebuilding it, one evening at a time. He held on. On a Saturday arrived warm and bright. Will came with Anna in the late morning, his small hand clasped in his mother's as they walked up the drive to Ashbourne Park. Catherine met them at the door, Edmund beside her. Will looked up at them with wide eyes, taking in the house, the gardens, the sheer scale of a world he had only glimpsed through the frame of a dinner-table disaster. Will asked uncertainly, Eddie, is this where you live? Edmund knelt to his level. It is. Would you like to see the frogs? Will's face lit up. He asked excitedly. There are frogs? Edmund replied solemnly. Hundreds. In the pond by the south garden. They have been waiting for you. Will turned to his mother. He asked eagerly, Can I? Anna looked at Catherine, who nodded. Anna smiled. Go ahead. We will follow. Will ran ahead, his small legs carrying him across the gravel drive toward the gardens. Edmund straightened and offered his arm to Catherine. She took it, and together they followed, Anna walking beside them. The pond was small, tucked into a corner of the south garden where the roses grew thickest. Will knelt at the edge, his hands braced on the stone rim, staring into the water with the intense focus of a child discovering a new world. A frog surfaced, and he gasped. He called out, "Eddie, look! It has spots!" Edmund crouched beside him. "That is Margaret." Will asked in wonder. "Margaret?" Edmund explained. "All the frogs are named Margaret. It is easier that way." Catherine, standing a few feet away with Anna, felt something loosen in her chest. She watched her husband, who had hidden this version of himself for 3 years, who had given his warmth to a stranger's kitchen and his correctness to her dining room, kneel in the grass and point out frogs to a child who called him Eddie. Anna spoke quietly. "He is different here," Catherine replied. "He is different everywhere now. It is taking time. But he is learning." Anna glanced at her. She asked gently, "And you?" Catherine was silent for a moment, watching Will lean precariously over the pond's edge, while Edmund steadied him with one hand. She answered slowly, "I am learning too. Learning that the person I was afraid did not exist is stronger than the system I built to replace her. Learning that anger and want and truth are not weaknesses. Learning that a marriage built on honesty is harder than one built on performance, but it is the only kind worth having." Anna nodded slowly. She said quietly, "I have not forgiven him. I do not know if I will, but I'm glad he's trying." Catherine agreed. "So am I." Will caught a frog, gently, cupping it in both hands, and brought it to Edmund with a look of pure triumph. Edmund examined it gravely, pronounced it the finest Margaret he had ever seen, and helped Will return it to the pond. The boy's laughter echoed across the garden, bright and unrestrained. Catherine looked at Anna. She offered warmly, "Stay for tea, in the morning room. It is a room without a schedule. I think you would like it." Anna hesitated, then nodded. She said softly, "I would like that." Summer deepened. The morning room became a place where the past and present coexisted without collision. Edmund continued to bring wildflowers. Catherine continued to read, her voice occasionally breaking the silence to share a passage or ask a question. Some evenings they spoke for hours. Some evenings they sat in companionable quiet, the fire burning low, the work of rebuilding happening in the spaces between words. One evening in late June, Edmund entered the room and did something he had never done before. He dragged his chair across the floor, the legs scraping against the wood, until it sat directly beside Catherine's. He sat down, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. He spoke quietly. "I fell in love with a woman because she let me be human for free. What I owe you is harder, to be human where it costs me everything. Not because you are easier than the cottage, because you are worth what the cottage never asked." Catherine set down her book. She turned to face him, her hand resting on the arm of his chair. She asked directly, "And what about me?" he asked uncertainly. "What do you mean?" Catherine explained. "You are learning to be present. Good. But I am learning too. Learning that the woman beneath the system is someone I want to know. Someone who is angry and brave and capable of destroying a marriage to save it. Someone who does not need a quarterly report to justify her existence." Edmund said gently, "I would like to meet her." Catherine replied, "You already have. She is sitting in this chair, and she is not finished with you yet." He smiled, small, tentative, but real. He said quietly, "Good." She leaned toward him slowly, giving him time to pull away. He did not. When her lips met his, the kiss was careful, deliberate, the kiss of two people learning each other. For the first time, his hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb brushing the corner of her mouth. She held on to the arm of his chair, steadying herself, anchoring herself to something solid. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. She said lightly, "You still use too many tea leaves," he acknowledged. "I know," she instructed. "Do not stop trying." He promised. "I will not." The third plate was removed from the dining room table in July. Catherine instructed the footman to return it to storage, leaving only 2 settings, one at each end of the long table. But they did not eat there. Instead, they took their meals in the morning room, plates balanced on their laps, the fire burning, even though the summer heat made it unnecessary. Anna visited every Saturday with Will. The boy had grown comfortable at Ashbourne. on running through the gardens with the confidence of someone who belonged. He brought Edmund frogs, flowers, and once a particularly large beetle that he insisted was royalty. Edmund accepted each offering with solemn respect, and Catherine watched from her chair, the anger and fear that had driven her to set the third plate slowly giving way to something quieter, something that felt like peace. One Saturday in late August, Anna stayed after Will had been taken to the kitchens for cake. She sat in the morning room with Catherine and Edmund, the three of them arranged around the fire that no longer served any purpose except ritual. Anna spoke carefully. The parish register has been amended. Samuel Birch's tenancy is restored. His name is listed among the families who served Ashbourne faithfully. Catherine said simply, "I'm good." Anna looked at Edmund. She said clearly, "I have not forgiven you. I do not know if I will. But I am grateful for what you have done. For the cottage, for the trust, for telling me the truth, even when it cost you everything." Edmund nodded. He said quietly, "I do not expect forgiveness. I expect to spend the rest of my life earning it." Anna stood. She said softly, "That is all I needed to hear." She left the room quietly, and a moment later they heard Will's laughter echoing from the kitchens. Catherine turned to Edmund. She stated plainly, "You are not forgiven." He acknowledged. "I know," she observed. "You are improving?" he asked. "The tea or the marriage?" Catherine replied. "Both. Marginally." She took his hand. He held on. The fire burned between them in the morning room. In the room that had been empty for 5 years and was now the center of everything they were building, held them in its warmth. Outside, the roses bloomed along the south wall, pink and fragrant in the morning light. Inside, 2 chairs sat side by side, close enough to touch. On the mantel, a single pressed wildflower rested in a small frame. The one Catherine had taken from Anna's cottage 6 months ago, the first piece of evidence in an investigation that had ended a marriage and begun something truer. The third plate was gone. 2 remained, both occupied, both seen. And in the morning room, where there was no schedule and no performance, only the slow, imperfect work of 2 people learning to be honest. The fire burned on.